Hey everybody, welcome to the Decoding Cocktails podcast. I'm your host, Chris LeBeau. At the ripe age of 38, I left my former career behind and joined the hospitality industry. Since then, I've been on a rapid journey of learning, meeting all sorts of great people, and this podcast is my chance to bring you along with me, whether I'm interviewing somebody that works in the industry, another enthusiast, or occasionally stepping back to share what I'm working on or my thoughts. I'm so glad you're here, and so with that aside, let's get into today's episode. What's happening, everybody? Welcome back for a kinda sorta special edition of the Decoding Cocktails podcast. I say all that because back in November, I was invited to speak at a gathering of entrepreneurs here in my city of St. Louis. And I talked a little bit about my journey to running a cocktail business, what all happens day to day with it. But also I kind of focused quite a bit on the values I hope I bring to it and the energy and kind of what I think kindles the enthusiasm to keep an entrepreneur going day to day, other than, frankly, just the need to pay the bills. So recently, the talks, after having been recorded, were released, and I got permission to go ahead and publish this. And so there'll be a little lead in here as a guy named Eric reads my bio, and then I'll kind of freewheel it from there. If you are a visual person, if you follow this back, the link back to my Substack page, there's also a video where you can watch me give the talk. But that's the story. I figured I'd go ahead and put this out there just in case you are curious. And I hope you enjoy this little talk here.
Chris LeBeau is one of those notable career pivots you read about or may have lived after working in strategic planning and marketing capacities for healthcare providers, consultancies, banks, and nonprofits. He now runs a cocktail education company. Decoding Cocktails was born out of Chris's longtime interest in mixology, which blossomed as he refined a process of simplifying mixology that made it accessible and exciting for enthusiasts. Fast forward 5 years, he has now taught thousands of people about the craft, works with bars, restaurants to improve their programs, and is an ambassador for the spirit company Spirit Bomb, which carries a wonderful array of Chris's favorite spirit, rum. So please welcome Chris LeBeau for Essential Ingredients, Why Purpose Matters When Shit Gets Tough.
Okay. So I'm very happy to be here. And so thank you to my good friend Matt Minetti way in the back for spurring me to apply to do this thing. So as Eric kind of said, so I'm be 42 here soon, and for the first 16 years of my career, I wasn't an entrepreneur. I didn't really think about being an entrepreneur. I worked for banks, hospitals, pharmaceutical companies, nonprofits, consulting firms, and kind of just marched about in my merry life. Coincidental to this story, I like to say as well, one of my biggest supporters, also heroes, my father is right there in the back in the black jacket. He's been an entrepreneur for most of my life. And yet, despite all the ways in which I've always looked up to him, I never thought, I want to do what Dad's doing. So it was very interesting to me when suddenly I was like, I kind of found myself running a cocktail business. And so Eric already did half the work for you by telling you a little bit about the business, but I want to tell you a little bit about what Decoding Cocktails is. I want to tell you about what I think the quote-unquote secret sauce is, and to this whole idea of purpose, I think the fuel, the things that I think entrepreneurs need to kind of power their journey ahead. So that's kind of what I want to cover today. You'll notice there is no slides or anything like that. At the very end, if I reference something, there'll be giant ass QR codes that can be scanned that will kind of take you to a little Google Doc, no email address, nothing required, but like the references that I think matter from the talk. And so with that, throughout the career of working for other people, at one point in time, 2018, I was working for a bank here in town. That bank had acquired the bank I was working for beforehand. And the job I had, it was fine, but honestly, the culture inside of it wasn't that great. And there were moments probably when I wasn't the right fit for the job. And so one day I came in, they were kind of doing the old corporate reshuffle, and we don't really have a seat for you anymore. And so while that's obviously very shocking up front, it forces the necessary reflection and conversations afterwards. I see several people in this room who I talked to, I'm sure, extensively after it was like, hey, thanks for coming in today, but today's your last day. So kind of certainly forces a lot of that reflection. But throughout my whole life, I've also been a lot of a seeker and a reader and whatnot. And one of the books that I came across is a book called Let Your Life Speak by a gentleman named Parker Palmer. And this book is about the search for vocation, or what sometimes comes up as a calling. And because purpose is one of those words that sometimes is a little bit more front and center, Matt suggested, hey, like this would be a good word to use right here. So, but when I think about vocation and calling, it's along the lines of purpose. So the book is worth reading. Again, it'll be in the QR code if you need that. But one of the sentences in the middle of the book that I just remember stopping me in my tracks was, what can I not stop doing? So what can I not stop doing? It's a very awkwardly kind of weirded thing, but as I kind of began to interrogate this through thinking and notes, the thing that kind of came to me is a term that I sometimes use to hearken back to yesteryear, maybe for people with children of Jim's age right here in the front, but show and tell, if you remember that from kindergarten. You know, a through line in my life I feel like that I've always seen is like, I'm doing a thing, I'm reading a thing, I want to show it to you, I want to tell you about it, I want to present on it. And so I've kind of realized that this has kind of always been a thing that has been a part of who I am. I get excited about something, and I want to transfer that excitement to you. So I think that's kind of the first thing that I think is important for all of us. You know, irrespective of entrepreneurship or not, it's good to know what are the things that kind of like pull you in that direction, because it's just part of how you're wired to be. So with that vocation thing kind of layered in right there, I want to talk to you a little bit about cocktails, how I came to that, and then eventually we will merge the two. So in 2010, the chef Gerard Kraft, many years ago now, was that 14 years ago now? His popular restaurant at the time was called Niche, and this was in the current day Peacemaker Lobster Crab Company over in Benton Park. And it was popular enough that Gerard opened a little second joint next to it, a much more scaled down version called Taste by Niche. And he brought in the bartender Ted Kilgore and his wife Jamie. Today they own Planter's House over in Lafayette Square. If you've been, not, go say hi to them. They're good people. But I went there with my girlfriend at the time, and we walked in the door, and immediately it said nothing about a bar that I'd ever seen before. You know, there's all these little tincture bottles out front. That was not happening back then. There's all this like stirring and shaking happening, which again, is still not common sometimes. I can remember still looking at the menu and seeing the word cherry herring listed. And I was like, what in the hell is that? Or this bottle of Yamazaki whiskey that I can still see on the wall. So anyways, I left this night thinking like, what in the hell was that? Like, I want to know more about this. So thankfully, my girlfriend at the time, very perceptive, thoughtful person, she got me a private lesson with a guy named Matt Sider. Matt, at the time, was helming the bar at Sanctuaria in the Grove. So this is back in 2010. And so on some Monday night, when they weren't closed, I went in for a couple hours, and he taught me a few of the basics. You know, and again, how much can you really retain? But like, he showed me a few basics. He also recommended to my girlfriend that she buy me what at the time was the hippest mixology book called The Joy of Mixology by Gary Regan. So this is my copy I got way back then. And you know, I'm a nerd, so like I made little flashcards, and I was quizzing myself, and I was learning some stuff. The next 4 years or so, story for another time, ask me afterwards, not necessarily today's talk, life was kind of all over the place enough that mostly got put on hold. But in 2015, I found myself in an apartment and started pulling things off the shelf. Started making a handful of drinks and getting back into the fold of things a bit. And it was around this time that I became friends through another friend with a guy named Tim Wiggins. Tim is the owner of the restaurants Yellow Belly and Lazy Tiger, At the time, he was helming the bar at Retreat Gastropub. And again, another story for another time, I talked Tim into hosting an event on a night they weren't open on how to think about home bartending. And so 16 of us on a Tuesday night went in, and Tim and his lovely wife, Lauren, they made a little freaking handbook, a semi-incomplete guide to home bartending, and we all had fun. But at the very back of that, it's like, hey, you want to learn more? Read all these books. So that is what I started doing and started making more drinks. Your friends, when you have this habit and hobby, you're like, please continue, please continue. So fast forward to 2018. 2018 happened earlier in the talk, so not long before the bank said bye-bye, I read a book called The Cocktail Codex. And it's an argument that there's only, I see you, it's an argument there's only 6 drinks in the world, and pretty much everything else is a derivative of those 6. And at that moment, I was like, only 6? And so I dug into the book. I really started to get the gist of it. But it's also a bartender's academic text. 85% of the recipes in that book, you lovely people, you're never going to make those because they're complex, they're massively long ingredients, but the tenets still stood. So I started in my mind, be like, okay, what doesn't belong in here? The average person doesn't need to know this. I also had happened to read at the time, and I think this is useful for anybody as you think about training or teaching people. I read that when you're teaching somebody a new skill, what's important to do is to identify what they call the points of failure. Whether you're learning to drive or dance or whatever, what are the things that make you want to quit? And so the average person, honestly, I hand people cocktail shakers all the time and they're like, how does this work? How do you shake? Why do you shake? How long do you shake? Why do you stir versus shake? So I'm beginning to identify these things. Don't give somebody a giant ingredient list. Don't give them an ingredient list with things that are very expensive. So I started kind of metaphorically ripping all that stuff out, showed it to my buddy Tim. He's like, this makes half sense. Okay, good enough. So then I did what I do. I said, my friends, hey, you want to come over and you want to see this? So this by now is the fall of 2019. So I did a couple classes at my house and figured it out, got some feedback. I believe Matt Minetti came to one of them. So I started to get some good feedback. It was interesting. And then, of course, 2020, you know that story. But 6 or 8 months into the Great Reset, whatever the hell that was, people started being like, hey, I just found your little website online. Could you teach me how to make drinks on the internet? So by December of 2020, I'm talking apartment complexes in Wichita, the United Way of Denver, people that I have never been anywhere near in my life are asking me to teach them how to make drinks on the internet. And I'm like, how the hell is this happening? But by March of 21, I was like, maybe this is just what I do full time now. So this is the story of how at 38-ish, I became a bartender, so to speak. And you remember the early years-ish of COVID. So that was all virtual stuff, right? Then the virus starts to recede a little bit. How about some in-person classes? New variant, virtual class, So certainly these violent questions of how does this business come to life? And so from here, what we'll talk about for a minute now is what am I doing today? Then I want to tell you about some of the hopefully lessons I've learned, a little bit more on that whole fuel thing I think required to stay in a business, and of course questions if you guys have them. So today, the primary driving element of this business is still cocktail classes. I'm in and out of homes and businesses, corporate fundraisers, your birthday party, just because I show up with all the stuff and we're going to talk about, hey, you just made this whiskey sour. Here's how it can become 8 drinks just by substituting ingredients. You made this old fashioned. Here's how it can become other drinks. Because I think one of the most important aspects of a cocktail is that it doesn't feel so complex that it doesn't feel like a special occasion drink. Let me look at my notes real quick just to make sure I'm on track here. Perfect, I'm on track. Beer and a glass of wine. They're wonderful things. I love beer, glass of wine, iced tea, whatever you want to have. But the thing is, those are all ready to drink drinks, so to speak, right? You pop the top and it's ready to go. And that's great because sometimes it just sounds right or you're in a hurry. The advantage that a cocktail has over a glass of wine is actually that you get to make it for yourself or for someone. You know, if later this week you call up your friends and say, hey, come on over tomorrow, I'm gonna order pizza from our favorite place up the street, they're gonna be like, cool, I'm all about that, I like pizza. If you call them up and say, hey, why don't you come over tomorrow, I'm gonna make pizza. Like that's a different level of invitation for people, right? You're worth taking the time to figure this out. I also might F it up, but this is a generous thing of your time. We use this statement all the time on like little greeting cards or billboards, like, it's not about the destination, it's about the journey. What if the fact about the cocktail is actually it's about the fact that it takes the time? What if you get to take the time to do the thing? It's something nice to do for yourself, to do for someone else. As we get better at a skill, it's getting better by practicing. So I think it's about knocking down a couple of those barriers and showing people. A woman came up to me last week. For as important as I am these days, still I have my OG bartender. My dad showed up for this one to help me out in back bartending. This woman comes up to me at the very end of the event. And she goes, my husband and I, we love cocktails. We go out for them all the time. I'm not afraid to try to make them anymore. I used to be afraid. Now, whether or not you need to be afraid, a cocktail's not going to bite you, right? But like to me, it's like the whole idea is like fear is just like, oh, I don't know how to do that. Oh, whatever, like a glass of wine. What if it suddenly felt simple? And so I think that's one of the things we get to do. So up till now, I'd argue nothing that I've done is really novel per se. The Cocktail Codex people, they already wrote the damn book. I just threw away a lot of the stuff, right? So I want to tell you about the next thing I'd layer on top of that vocation thing, maybe. Because when I'm in a class or perhaps giving a talk like this, the thing that I can't help but do is just get like totally into it. I'm in class and I'm like, I'm going to command, hopefully politely, your attention because I'm so damn enthused about the subject. And I find that sometimes that's what people need, is that little push. Like they feel excited. I read a quote by a restaurateur. In his worldview, it's all it takes for something extraordinary to happen is one person with enthusiasm. And I feel like sometimes that's what I get to be, is I get to be their motivational cocktail coach, if you will. But you might not also be exactly like me. So I want to tell you about the most bizarre named book that I think could help you on top of this vocational search that I already mentioned with Let Your Life Speak. Again, all in the QR codes. Good news. There's a book called The Art of Seduction by Robert Greene. So this talk got real interesting real fast now. So what the author talks about in the book is that a significant portion of the act of seduction, if you will, is actually not romantic or sexual. It's about building trust, drawing people in. You know, certain movie stars, musicians, I can think of great servers who have been so captivating in a restaurant before. That is a form of like drawing people in. And in the book, he lays out 9 types of seducer personality. And so one of them was called the charismatic. I read it and I was like, well, shit, that is me to a T. Like I just, come on. Versus, and if you look at what's his face again in the back of the room, he'll agree with this. My brother, for one other example, there's one called the natural. And this is someone who has a childlike embodiment in their life. This is someone who, screw the rules, like let's just have fun and figure it out. My brother's the one dancing around in crazy costumes at festivals and people are just like, what's that guy doing over there? So I think why I'm telling you all this stuff is that starting a business is definitely one of the most rewarding and also one of the most freaking frustrating, hardest things I've ever done. So I think one of the other things that's important about calling and the things that make you feel like yourself, genuinely, you use this seduction personality to feel more genuinely you, not to deceive people, is so that all the moments that it sucks, because there are so many moments, you have that fuel to keep going, right? So hopefully that you're more pleasant to work with and a more alive person to deal with as a client, but also, because like, listen, people come up to me all the time, it's true. Wow, cocktail business, that's gotta be a lot of fun. Sure, it's fun, but also the reality is, like, bookkeeping, it's not fun, juicing limes 3 hours before an event. It's not fun. I don't know if you've ever carried a milk crate full of booze in the rain at 11:30 at night after working for 4 hours. It's not fun. But hopefully the things about what you're doing bring you to life enough that it makes going through all that crap there in the first place. So I think that's part of what we're doing is we are beginning to like find those internal drivers that make us feel like this is actually worth my time. Where the heck are we? Okay, perfect, good. Another thing that I think is useful to think about in terms of who we are as well, in terms of why we're starting this business. My friend Brian works for a wealth management firm here in town, and he actually works in the division that helps entrepreneurs sell their businesses. And so they have an association they belong to called the Exit Planning Institute. And according to the Exit Planning Institute, a year after selling their business, 3 out of 4 entrepreneurs report being very unhappy. Very unhappy. I want to tell you a quick thing that I heard from another entrepreneur a while ago that I think begins to think about this. This entrepreneur I was talking to, and they told me, you know, I looked around and realized I don't really have any hobbies at all. And you don't have to be an entrepreneur to have no hobbies, but an entrepreneur, a company, will begin to eat your life if you're not careful. And the question is, if building a business is this hard, because it is very hard, why are we doing it? And I think what that research tells us is if you get all the money, but you have no plan afterward, you don't know why you did it, you've got a boat, you've got 2 houses and all these things, but after a while, you don't have anything left in your life. So I think for me, and I want to tell you about where I think this business is going, but I also so this wasn't the talk, it was in the final rehearsal right before I came here, so I'm deciding to put it in. 2 questions worth considering. Despite the fact I said money doesn't matter, pretend this scenario, imagine this scenario for yourself for a minute. So imagine you do have ultimate financial security, 20 million bucks, whatever the hell the number is, doesn't matter. You don't have to work if you don't want to. 2 questions. What is something you'd like to do once a day? And what is something you'd like to do once a week? When I mulled these questions over and over again, I'd like to have coffee quietly in the morning, and I'd like to have dinner with my friends once a week. I can do both of those things right now. And your answers could be different. They could be big, you know, and also for some people, it could be geographically contingent, right? I want to be able to walk in the mountains. Well, that requires moving. But I think, like, what is all the pain for is a very interesting question. Because what it's not for me, is this. When I was younger, going back to the younger part of my career, I worked at BJC Healthcare, and I worked at their internal consulting department, their strategic planning department, and I got to work with hospital presidents, the bosses of those presidents, and the corporate leadership. And they were all, you know, I would sit there, again, I'm 25, whatever, but I'm just like, wow, look at these big keynote talks and these big important decisions they're making. I want to do that. Fast forward 12, 15 years, whatever, I don't want to do any of that. That's not who I am, right? So like right now, and we'll talk about the pain, the real pain of Decoding Cocktails in just a minute, like I'm a one-man enterprise, and I can tell you something. I don't want Decoding Cocktails to be a 5-person company, a 10-person company, God forbid a 100-person company. Because the things I really like, I got into this, go back to the vocation thing, I got into this to teach people how to make cocktails. And if the company grows, I either need to be CEO or I need one. And I don't really want either one of those things. You know, yesterday was a nice day. My girlfriend, she works often 7 days on, and then she's off for a couple. Middle of the day. Didn't have to ask anybody's permission, just went for a walk, sat on a patio for hours, and that is all the autonomy I'm able to buy myself when the company is really, really small. There's nothing wrong with a big company. The question is, what kind of company do you want to build? So one of the words I am going to take to task today, which is not a bad word, just a word worth re-examining, is scale. How do we scale this thing? Are we scaling? We need to really kind of get this across a systemic reach or whatever. Scaling is fine, but it is not the thing to do. It is a thing you can do. You know, are you building this big company? Do you have these big dreams because society wants you to have them, or do you want them? And I think this is where we have to ask ourselves, this isn't about being totally selfish, but it's about asking, why are we even doing this? Because suddenly you're running a 100-person company and you're miserable because that's not what you actually set out to do. If you are a manager of people, perfect. But I think asking ourselves these questions can actually be very important in terms of figuring out why we're building this business. And sometimes you do give yourself to a cause, and that's great. But I think that level of honesty, because as an entrepreneur, you got a lot of lonely hours by yourself. I know that. And again, you got to hopefully be able to sleep well at night. I can barely sleep as it is, but you got to be able to sleep well. One other thing that is important, again, concerns scaling and all these things. Access to capital. So when I was working for the bank, before the bank that bought that one, I had a boss named Mike. Mike was a great guy. One time we were in Boston. That's a good story. You should ask me about it later. But we're riding in a cab, and Mike says to me very offhandedly, other people's money is expensive. And I remember this quote because the idea is no matter who gives you money, whether it's grandma, it's a grant, arch grants, a venture capital, a bank, they want something. And the more somethings you have pulling on you, the less you can do what you want. Now, some businesses require capital. The question is, do you want to build a business that does require outside capital? Because that's a choice. I hope, I wrote on here, by the way, because I can feel myself, I wrote on this thing, have fun. So I'm going to get back to trying to have fun right now. I don't want this to be a mean lecture. I just think it's an interesting re-examination of the things that we see we're supposed to do. Oh, look, I could do this thing. And you can, but again, why are we doing this? I feel like a lot of this is about figuring out how to get to the end of the road and be like, I'm glad I made those choices. We'll see if that happens for me, but just a quick thought on that. So where in the heck is this business today? So a couple of lessons learned for me, a quick close, and hopefully then if there's questions, we can answer them. So 4+ years in, where are things at right now? What I've so far discovered about the cocktail class business is it's very seasonal. And if you could annualize Q4 and the early part of Q1 for me, this business is great. But that's not how it's panned out. So I've got this spirit company that I chased down because I like their products. I'm now repping them a little bit in the market. I've started to kind of enter into conversations with some bars and restaurants. But again, the question is do I have an awareness problem? Is there a market saturation problem? How many cocktail classes can a person do in St. Louis where there's not big tourist populations and whatnot? So the question is do I add on new product lines? Do I work with any brand that will have me to try to conglomerate that? Because at what point in time do I say yes to a brand that I actually don't respect, right? Again, at what point in time, going out of business or being bankrupt, neither one of those sounds like a good idea. But I'm regularly confronted with this idea that people can love what I do, and it still doesn't mean I'm gonna make it. I'm rooting for myself, I'm pedaling like hell, but it's this reality that it can look cool on the outside, but it doesn't mean that's how it's going on the inside. The other thing that I think is important to try to figure out, and this is, in general for life, but because entrepreneurship is plenty hard, I feel like there's the moments when a big contract has placed itself in front of me. And before it gets signed, or God forbid they even give me the money, I'm celebrating the W, I'm chalking it up, right? And then it doesn't happen. And the crash from that is just, it's terrible, because you got to figure out how to come back from that. So I feel like finding the ways when you're running your own business to not have too much attachment to the outcome, but to the process, right? Showing up to make the calls, got to celebrate the wins when they happen, but God almighty, the number of times I've been I'm just so I feel like that is another thing that's important internally to grasp onto about this, is how do you keep going? If you're a person who's at least that kind of thing happens to. Okay. Final thing as we kind of wrap up here. It's been a bit of fun, interesting week in the course of our nation's history for sure, regardless of a person's outlook. It's been a turbulent week or so. And so I've been left thinking about humanity quite a bit. And so AI, another tool that could be talked about quite a bit during Startup Week. I've got an AI tool that I like to use as well. Like I fed this talk into it. Hey, what do you think about this? Hey, this is unclear or whatever. Clean this up. Good points. I think AI can be quite a valuable thing. But I think in a moment when we are seeing a lot of our world automated, it raises a question of how do we make our business even more human? So 2 books for the end. I think you can ask him afterwards. You'll be like, will you stop with all the citations all the time? This book, Unreasonable Hospitality, is written by this restaurateur, Will Guidara. And they basically ask this question: what if we invested as much money in the dining room services of our restaurant as we invested in the kitchen? Because in a way, so often restaurants, the tables where we showcase what the bar put out, what the kitchen turns out. What if our service was at that level? And what they found was it wasn't about putting out even nicer glassware. It was about being more thoughtful in what they did. So, and I think what they learned in the restaurant was so often it was about researching to understand customers. It was about listening to what they said. And so I think there are many moments when we can find for ourselves that trying to figure out how do we make our business more human to where people want to work with you even more, right? It's like your service can be great, but if your people are if they are just getting on, people are going to be like, man, I just love going over there. And so finding the way that you can light your staff up or yourself up so that people feel like they're just on their side, I think that's very important. So finally, a book I finished just last week, started making changes on my business just last week, a book called Right Thing, Right Now by a guy named Ryan Holiday. So Ryan's written a lot about stoicism and whatnot. This book is about the idea of justice. It's written about the idea of character, morality, and these things. And in the book, there was this line, and I was reading, it just leaps off the page. He goes, it is much easier to be a great person than a good person. And I think about as the year winds down and a new year starts for us. Best year ever, right? Stretch goals, revenue targets. Like this year, I'm gonna this personal best, right? But what about the times when we can just also do the thing that's right, the thing that's good? So for me, so it's not just all lecturing at you to do this thing. Commodity agriculture is a thing where a whole bunch of product is thrown into a big silo and it's just spills out into whoever buys it, right? So sugar, plenty long history that is not a good one. And even today in the modern day world, where some sugar comes from is always questionable. And when you're in a cocktail class with me, you don't know anything about my simple syrup. And guess what? I actually don't know anything about it either because I just bought whatever is cheapest. And I was like, you know what? But these are the things that I know at night. Is like, I see all the limes and lemons I throw away. I stare at all the plastic cups that go into the trash. Nobody's complaining at me, but I was like, okay, well, the first thing I can do immediately is stop buying commodity sugar, and I can start buying this. The guy begins to wrap up to the book by saying, it's not a principle if it doesn't cost you money. And so I think for me, it was like, okay, I'll pay 30% more for sugar because it's like, hey, if I can sleep a little better at night knowing I'm making the right decision. Because I think at the end of the day, hopefully if we're building a business, it's about something we're proud of. Hopefully something we'd be proud if someone was looking over our shoulder and didn't realize it. They'd like to see the decisions we were making. But it's also a thing about doing it despite the fact of whether people know or not. So that is a long, winding talk about entrepreneurship and whatever else the hell that was. Thank you guys for your attention. Just in case you would like them, you're welcome to scan this thing or whatever. I have little cards here if you ever have questions. And I am happy to answer questions if you guys have them.
Anyone have questions?
And if you don't have any, let's
Questions?
party. Oh,
Anything? Oh,
It seems like
I think because they're taping it, they need to. Yep.
Hi, so thank you, and seems like you're a big reader.
Sure.
So I'm wondering what books you'd recommend that are not in that QR code that you couldn't figure out a way to squeeze into the talk, but that you've enjoyed either recently or all time, either one.
Man, so many books. So Let Your Life Speak is probably the book that I've actually gifted the most. But if I had to say something else, man, I know. For some reason, my brain is actually like misfiring. There's a book called, so while the word may not always play as well, there's a book that was written in 2010 by a gentleman named Seth Godin, Godin. He has a book called Tribes, and it's about building groups of like-minded people and leading them. You know, again, the word tribe is one that we've kind of worked with since he wrote that, but I was having this conversation this morning with my dear friend, Chris Bay, about before and after moments in your life. And I remember on an airplane reading that book and just feeling like the author was just right, talking directly to me. And so that's the other one that comes to mind right away for sure. In the back over here with their venture shirt right here. Oh, of course. Man, Pat, point those QR codes over here.
So I think you made a really interesting point, and I think it's something that a lot of entrepreneurs struggle with, right? It's how do you define your work-life balance, or how do you define your time? And so as you were thinking and stating, hobbies are very important. How did you determine that your hobby would become your entrepreneurship, and then how do you separate the two? Because I think you're right, it can consume you.
So the answer is, at times, my work-life balance it fluctuates. That guy right there, my girlfriend and a handful of other people are people who calm me down. I am a very excitable person. She is a very mellow person. Being with her levels me out for sure. I think when you're at the start of an entrepreneurial journey, you just don't know. It's one of those things. You're just like, oh yeah, parenting's hard. Oh, okay, cool. And then you're in it, and you're like, oh, this is really freaking hard, right? So I think that's it. It's like you just don't realize. It's like, oh, I didn't realize you meant like the 17th rejection in a row. I didn't realize that one was going to suck even more, right? You hear it's hard, but then you live it as being hard. So, it kind of like it's more like, I think you almost have to not know how bad it's going to be, but yeah, at times you just have to hopefully. In life, because it's easy. We all know it in life. Like you wait, it's like it's January, and you're like, okay, I'm moving through life. And you look up like, how's it October, right? So I think there's the moments you have to be able to stop and reset every once in a while to kind of like take stock in like, is this working? So yeah, I think like that's how like maybe a hobby begins to transition to a business, but and that's where also for so many of these things, they start out as side hustles too, right? I think it's just like we just have to be careful. Like, building a company is a very cool thing and a very noble thing to do, and you should do it if you want to, but we should not lionize it. It's not a thing that has to be done. It's just a path. Again, working for other people, totally fine. My friend, again, this morning, he was like, I would never be an entrepreneur. I'm like, cool, sounds good. Sounds like a great idea to me. So I think you gotta. Final thing, a guy who I interviewed once on my podcast, he runs a cocktail garnish company. This is the kind of thing you learn when you run a cocktail business. You meet people who run garnish companies. He goes, I think being an entrepreneur is about discovering your own personal pain threshold. And at times you just got to know when you got to tap out. So, yeah.
Hi there, everyone. My name is Deborah. I wanted to say one thing. You made me think about my spark that got me here today.
Sure.
I was leaving a place that I always frequent on Tuesday to do volunteer work. And as I was driving off, I looked back and said, that's where most of us all will end up. It's an aging center where everybody is leaving, and they tell me stories every day about, if I were you, what would I do? So that's all I want to leave everyone. What would you do today if you knew that's where your end was, and that's only where you're going to end up outside of the next level?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you.
You made me think about that.
Thank you.
Your
Appreciate
purpose is great.
Hi, I'm Terrence. Thank you so much for your presentation. My question for you is, you shared that you have a suite of skills. And I know that this is where your current focus is. Have you given consideration to taking those existing skills and deploying them elsewhere?
So like in fields outside of like cocktails and mixology, you know, so admittedly, there are moments when you, in the middle of the night as an entrepreneur, when you're like, is this working, right? I feel like I have given myself enough to this industry. Was it Terrence? Sorry.
Yes.
Yeah, that there are moments I'm like, I sure hope this is going to work, but I feel like I have found a home in this industry. I think the question is, in the long run, between all of us friends and all of you way in there in the internet, is will I do it under my own accord, or will eventually I end up working for someone else because the pain becomes too much? So, but right now I think like I've kind of found where I belong for now. It's more a question of like, who's running the show?
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Chris, for such an amazing talk. My question is there anything that surprised you or challenges you faced early on studying a business in St. Louis?
About starting a business in St. Louis? You know, I guess, I mean, it was started during the pandemic, so it was interestingly devoid of that. But yeah, I think, you know, quickly the mentors that I developed, many of them run hospitality programs here. And I think it's just, yeah, like, I think people are very, very giving. I've told Tim at Yellow Belly more than once, and Matt Longville, who runs the Van Deet, more than once, like, you guys need 1-900 numbers for when I call you so you can charge me for my time. But people are extremely giving. So I guess, and like, I don't know that that's a locally St. Louis thing, but I think, yeah, we live so much of our life behind this screen. And I think just the moments of like sitting down with somebody face to face and asking them questions or building that trust where you can call them, I think is very invaluable. Oh, yeah, Holly, yeah.
So how do you strike a balance between, you know, working your ass off for now and like basically my question is, I always have this thought in my head of like, I'm going to work really, really hard right now while I have the energy. That way I can rest later.
Sure.
But I don't know if that's the right approach. If I should have more balance, and I know there's no should, but like, it's like I don't know what the right balance is.
Well, first, just because I'm standing up here, this is an answer. It does not mean it is the answer to this thing, but like, I think it's important to find some level of recharge along the way. So I've tried to like, again, I try to insulate my mornings a little bit. I try to like, again, mandatory fun time at the pool or whatever. What are the things that like, because otherwise, yeah, I'll just sit there and just stare at the computer all day. I think to what this nice person said right here, the only thing I know for sure is there's nothing wrong with sprinting and pedaling hard, but I think delaying any level of gratification too long, we are delaying it potentially for a day that may not come, to be very reductive, to be very dark. And so I think there's a moment when, yeah, I think that trying to find ways to also say that, there's a Parkinson's law, which is a task will fit the amount of time we give it. And so giving yourself the morning or the afternoon to work, but then being like, hey, Holly, you have an appointment with Holly at, the park. So I think trying to schedule in mandatory fun and like, so do what you will with this. I'm a much bigger fan of the stick than the carrot. And so like, oh, Holly, you didn't go to the park today. That costs you. Here's what you really do. You're feeling real sadistic right now. So you figure out a cause you do not support. And say, if you don't go do this fun thing, you have to donate money to this cause. And I have put that on the line before. You want to meditate for 30 days? It's a great way to meditate. Put something you despise. So like, but I think, because otherwise, again, it's like, oh, I'll get to it later. I don't. I know that. So I think finding the levers that get you out, I do think is very important. But I'm not always great at it. So.
Hi, thank you so much. My name is Christina. Thank you so much for your presentation. Earlier you asked the question, why am I even doing this? Has that question or the answer to that, has that changed along the course of your business?
I do this because I love it. Do I love it enough to be worth the pain is, I feel like, an ongoing question. But like, I gotta tell you, like, when I'm teaching a class, and this happens all the time, it's crazy. Like, I mean, teaching a class and people are just like, on the table, this drink is incredible. Oh my God. Like, I mean, I've had people before like, class, you're not gonna leave now, are you? Like, will you stay and hang? Like, I mean, like, people are grabbing on me like I'm some kind of celebrity. Maybe I am, but like, but it is this incredible high. But it's like, but then there's all the other crap. And so it's just a question of, is that worth this, right? So the answer is, it's just an ongoing conversation of, again, at what point is the pain, financial or emotional, too much at times, right? But that's why I'm doing it, because it's, when I'm teaching, I don't really want to be doing anything else at that point. So that part, again, #blessed. So, yeah.
My name is Saul. You are clearly somebody who synthesizes information incredibly well. You came here with a list of books to read and quoted from them extensively, and they seem to play an important part in your journey, and especially the ideas that come from these books. One of the things that I struggle with, and many of people I know struggle with, is that there is a lot of the ideas industry of inspiration is pretty large. And there's probably some stuff that is not applicable or just downright nonsensical.
Sure.
I'd love to hear a little bit about how you look at ideas and say, this is going to be the right book for me. And when you find that passage, this is the right passage for me. But more importantly, what are the books where you're like, I'm reading this book and this seems really inspirational, but then you're like, you know what, this is a load of garbage, or it's not going to work for me.
Sure,
because that's,
sure.
I think, really the thing that we
It
all
is.
struggle with. We're on LinkedIn and we see some post and we're like, that's a great idea. And it's completely not relevant.
Sure.
How can we synthesize information?
I'll tell you what, now yeah, I think, one, I've gone through rolling chapters of my life. Like the early years of the cocktail business, it was, I mean, for lack of a better way to say it was booze and nothing else. Like, and over the past 18 months, I have kind of woken back up to it. But I think what I'll say, Saul, is there was an early part of my career when I was a little too on the old thought leader train or whatnot. And so to me, I guess I am looking for the practitioners. And part of it, yeah, it's just got to be like, how do I use this right now, right? And so I guess like I said with the sugar thing, right? It's how do I begin to apply this now? Because I have definitely, like, how do I apply it in the walk that I am walking, right? Because some days, if it's just inspirational, but it makes me get up and make phone calls the next day, great. So I think it's just, there's so much armchair quarterbacking that the question is like, I don't have a great answer for you, Saul. Like, it's, I am very, very, despite all the quoting, I am very suspicious of a lot of the things that I read. So I tend to find Seth Godin, I mentioned earlier, Tim Ferriss, Ryan Holiday, Krista Tippett. There's like 4 or 5 like North Stars that in my life. Doesn't mean everything they've ever said is right, for sure. But there are people that are some of my BS meters, and I think I'm more careful and selective about where I draw some of that in. But yeah, from there, I think it's just, there are things that are good advice, perhaps even, but not even good for us. I forget, I remember having the thought recently, I was thinking about something, I read something, I was like, oh, that's interesting. I was like, yeah, that would be a total waste of time for me. So I think sometimes you just don't know until you try it out too. But yeah, for people that just walk around preaching things or whatnot, you got to be careful.
So read broadly but skeptically.
Yeah, I think being skeptical, I think, is great. I also read just a lot of food journalism in general. I think writing from the heart speaks very deeply to me. I think, like a very emotional work matters to me, and so anymore now I'm interested in things that really speak to the deeper elements of who I am. But you're right. Yeah, please go ahead.
If I may cheat by asking a 2-part question.
Ooh.
So the first question is, when you launched this business, did you feel that you had a group of established competitors?
Okay, first question would be, not really. There's not, the cocktail classes are honestly, they're quite the bear to pull off. They're fun, thankfully. You find it online. They pay reasonably well, too. But they're a lot of work to execute, and big problem, some of the, what am I going for here? Like a reckoning happening in the hospitality industry in terms of like what sometimes people pay bar staff, right? It's like, you're not going to get anything good for that. And so I think finding people who are you're paying well and are kind of in it. So yeah, I think that the competition is fairly small, at least locally, is what I would say. So.
Okay, well then the second question doesn't really apply, but I'm a little surprised that places like, say, I don't know, the wine and cheese store, or that they wouldn't do what you're doing, basically. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because they're not like, I mean, they're big, but they're not the national brand, right?
Yeah.
Where they could. So it's interesting that they didn't pursue this path as a way to, I don't know, amplify its connection with customers and all that.
Yeah, I mean, so I know the people that own wine and cheese place. I talk to liquor stores all the time, grocery stores. I'm like, see all this stuff? Nobody knows what any of this does. And when I say it to them, they go, "Yep," but they have not seen the investments. Like, I have been in the room with the Deerberg family, be like, "See all this crappy on the shelf?" Like, nobody knows what in the hell it is. So I don't know what it takes to get people on. I will say this also: food is 15 years, 20 years, 25 years ahead of drinks. So you think about the food revolution. So again, reading food research or beer is sometimes a glimpse into where drinks might be going because it got started before that, and there's just a lot more money. So I look to those industries a lot for that. And so again, cooking has continued to accelerate in the country. So it's a question of, are we on? So here's a fun macro stat, because Total Wine is the largest retailer for booze in the country. I talked with their head of mixology. Again, perk of a podcast. People think you know what you're doing. I don't. But I talked with their head of mixology, brand new role. Before the pandemic, booze sales accounted for 26%-ish of Total Wine's book. Now it's over 50. And that happened real fast. And now they're like, how people come in and they want to know. So I think we will hopefully also see people being like, oh, look what they're doing over there. So hopefully it's a thing that people will follow along with over time. But drinks are also behind that, is what I would say as well. So, yeah.
Anyone else? All right, this last one, I think.
Sure.
It's a fun question. So I said it's a fun question.
Good.
So there is a now move for non-alcoholic drinks in mocktails. Can you give us some insight and a little business promo for yourself about?
It is a massive, massive category. Also, Total Wine. So first thing we need to know, and I think a lot of us know this in our bones, but 4 out of 5 NA drinks sold at Total Wine are sold to people who drink alcohol. So this is not an either or movement, right? It's a both and thing. It's more like, I would like a thing to drink. Sometimes there happens to be this thing in it, and sometimes there does not, right? I think the NA movement, I was having this conversation just yesterday with another startup lackey, a woman named Phyllis Ellison, but like, I'm gonna be interested to see how the NA movement does. It's not going back, it should not go back. I want us to destigmatize the whole thing. Why aren't you drinking? Or what, like, have whatever the hell you want. But it is also, in my opinion, it is cool to not drink right now too, more nationally. I think booze has caused a lot of problems in our country, and for people who don't want it in their life, get it out of there. I think we could all do with drinking less, and I think we're getting better at making NA cocktails and NA drinks, and I think that's important. I think people deserve a dignified drink when they ask for something, right? I ask for NA cocktails very carefully, because a lot of times it's just it's just fruit juice, right? So it's just like, a lot of times it's just a sugar bomb. And you might be okay with that, but I think part of the reason why a lot of bars will say, oh, our customers don't want an NA drink, They're not asking for that. Well, they're asking for soda or club soda, or they're just leaving, but it's because they sell garbage. if they put as much effort, how much effort do you put into the food in this bar or restaurant, right? How much effort do you put in the food and drinks? Well, we don't have anybody who knows that. Well, say no more, right? You don't just let people walk, hey, do you know how to make burgers? No, not really. Well, go figure it out, will you? No, you don't. That's not how it works. Bartenders, hey, can you make me this thing? No, I've never done that before. Well, make it anyways. No. That shouldn't be how it is. So I think, to get back to your question, I think we are taking the NA movement more seriously now, and I think it's very important, because I think people always deserve something that is delicious if they're going to be paying you money for it. And so I think we're going to continue to see it growing, which is very important right there. Disregard the whole rant about, I'll be curious to see in 10 years if the NA trend continues to grow or if it begins to level out. I don't care. I'm more interested, because I feel like sometimes right now there's a little bit of blowback, but we will see. So.
All right.
Oh, you know what? I think we're done, but you and I will talk right after this, okay? Okay. Perfect.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody. Let's thank Chris LeBeau.
Thank you. Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, I'd love it if you'd write us a review on whatever platform you listen on, or share an episode with a friend. The show notes are available at decodingcocktails.com/podcast. Happy cocktailing, everybody.